Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom Thoughts. In this episode, Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, Anthony, aka Runeslinger from the Casting Shadows podcast, Evil Jeff from the Minions and Musings podcast, and Joe from the Hindsightless podcast all call in to talk about railroads, and I talk about them again myself. And also, more monsters versus flying critters in the world of the Dragon Slayers. So here we go. All aboard!
Hey, Pink Phantom, Jason here. Just calling about your latest episode where you ponder on railroads. I really think it comes down to the idea of a pre-plotted adventure versus a sandbox. If you're going to do a pre-plotted adventure with a definite goal and, certain points they have to hit, then yeah, you're going to have a railroad at certain points. Well, railroad's maybe not the right word, but yeah, it's going to be more linear because they have to hit these things. If you're doing an open sandbox where the players decide where they go and the NPCs and factions have timelines for accomplishing their goals, and those are only affected when the PCs interfere, then no, it doesn't have to be a railroad. So I really think it depends on what you're setting forth. If you're trying to tell a story, then yeah, it's going to be a railroad. If you're going to interpret the story if you have a story in mind before you start playing, it's going to be a railroad. If you do not have a story in mind and we just let the play develop, and after you're done playing, you look back and piece the story together, then it doesn't have to be a railroad. Those are my 2 cents.
Hey, Pink Phantom. It's Anthony calling in. First time in a long time for Phantom Thoughts. And I'm calling in about your railroading section in your recent episode. So in my explorations of the topic, I see that we have this notion represented as a noun, we're on a railroad, or as a verb, the game master is railroading us. And I see this as a movement from railroading, the verb, to a railroad as a noun, as the years pass by. But of those 2 factors, the adventure or the game master, the adventure is powerless. It can't influence play unless the game master allows it to. They can always introduce more choices. They can always interfere with the denial of choice, which is what a railroad is. In a role-playing game, we pride ourselves on it being about our decisions. The railroad actions of the game master, things like the Quantum Ogre, deny you your choices. And so they get in the way of RPG play. So even if an adventure is linear, choices still exist, like not solving the mystery, leaving the dungeon, not stealing the idol, that sort of stuff. When that choice is removed, then someone is railroading you.
Phantom, it's Evil Jeff. Alrighty, so when is a railroad a railroad? Or how much is a railroad? And I think your example of Indiana Jones was great. Really, I think it's a railroad when you put an engine on the tracks and drag the players down the tracks no matter what they do. That is a railroad. Having a set of tracks that leads to a specific point is not a railroad. It is the option. They could, if there's no engine, the players can walk down the tracks all they want, but they can go off to the side. In many ways, it's like a maze. There's only one way through the maze. There are a lot of side paths, but there's only one way. Is that a railroad? You made the players go through and only go one way? So, if there's only one solution, I can't call it a railroad. Some people might not like it. Oh, you took away my, chance of doing things the way I wanted to do. Well, we don't always get what we want in life. People need to learn that. Good show. Keep it up.
Yo, Phantom, what's up, man? It's been a long time since I've called in, but I want to let you know I'm still out here listening. So yeah, I just got finished listening to your latest episode about railroads and stuff, and I totally agree with you, dude. Like, your examples of Indiana Jones were spot on. Sometimes you do need to narrow the path in order to present fun, interesting, coherent stories to players. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of disjointed scenes, right? And like, if you're playing in a longer campaign, as a player, I'll just speak for myself. As a player, I wouldn't want that. That doesn't sound fun. That's just a bunch of one shots, right? There's got to be some through thread in there to string everything together. And so, yeah, man, sometimes you do need to narrow the path, and it's not the worst thing in the world. Actually, if you give players a rumor, you could consider that railroading. If you attack a village near where the players are, you could consider that role play or railroading. Anytime you present any sort of hook, you could consider that railroading if you look at it that way. And again, like, railroading isn't inherently bad. It's how it's done. And plus, railroads, yeah, sure, if you're just on a straight line railroad, that's not fun, though it can be. If you're on a friggin' bullet train in Japan, that's an awesome railroad. But if you're on a roller coaster, that's a railroad too. And those are fun, full of twists and turns and unexpected drops and all that stuff. Even if you've looked at the roller coaster from the ground, you still don't get the full concept of what it's going to be like till you're actually on it riding the roller coaster. So yeah, man, I'm right there with you. No, I don't think railroad bad is always right, man. And all the when you were talking about the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide and talking about the contradictions and the vague mentions of things that never get revisited on, it just made me just think about, like, man, nostalgia is a hell of a drug. Anyway, dude, you take it easy, Phantom. Have a good one. Peace out.
So 4 viewpoints there, and I think some points of agreement and some points of disagreement among them. So where do I sit on this? Where after listening to this and my own rambling thoughts from before, where do I stand on this notion of railroads and player agency? I think over time, and I think some of this is a reaction to the way that uh, the game has developed, the later editions of D&D and Paizo and their adventure paths and things like that. That the idea of the sandbox and player agency has been placed on this very high pedestal, and it's important for sure. But I don't think it can be the be all and end all of a campaign. Because the only way to make player agency constantly paramount, just constantly paramount, the overriding uh, driver of the campaign, is if you eliminate the idea that choices and decisions have consequences. And also that in the world, whatever world you're journeying through in your RPG campaign, that everything is always open. In a sandbox world where there are factions playing out their own agendas in the background, there's going to be a reaction to what the PCs do in the world, particularly if what those PCs are doing are acting against the interests of one or more of the factions. The reaction of the factions is going to be to find a way to narrow the damage they can do, to give the PCs limited options if they want to continue to these actions that are going against this faction's interest or that faction's interest. There's also the matter of what the PCs are doing themselves when they choose to accept an adventure or a quest or a goal, whatever you want to call it. There is an endpoint to that quest adventure goal. There is something they are trying to achieve. There is a MacGuffin they are trying to acquire. There is a person they are trying to get to. There is an army they're trying to stop. The Greeks in the battles of Thermopylae and Salamis chose the battlefield to limit the option of the Persians that were opposing them so that they could better utilize their strengths against the Persian numbers. With every choice, with every decision, with every move that's made toward a given goal, a given line to cross, you get more and more and more into a funnel. The number of choices you have get less and less. At some point in every adventure, in every, for lack of a better term, story arc, you reach an unavoidable obstacle or an unavoidable conflict. So what does that mean for player agency? The player agency has to be earlier. It has to go with getting to know your enemy, getting information on a place you're going or an artifact you are seeking out and potential defenses and defenders. Where is it hiding? What sort of traps can you expect, if any? What kind of entities are looking out for it or trying to gain it for themselves? And the player agency may be in picking the location of the confrontation. It may be in getting to know enough to get the right gear, the right resources for the upcoming challenges and trials. It may be in acquiring allies who will weaken an enemy that's opposing them. And this is where I think the no prep, low prep approach that a lot of people seem to champion would fall off. Because if you don't already have that information out there in the world, you're eliminating the player's ability to know what they need to know. In a lot of ways, you're taking away player agency because there's a lot of randomness in that kind of prep work. At some point, the antagonist to the PC's protagonist has to have a plan. Whether that antagonist is an actual person or entity, or whether it's just a given set of circumstances that have to occur as they pursue their goals. At some point, the sandbox has to fall away and there have to be some rails. And I think the player agency in that circumstance is that they chose to get on those rails. Whether that's accepting an adventure path that's going to take you from level 1 to 20, and by the nature of that kind of design, you're going to have more limitation on choices than some wide open world, or whether it's a choice of, we've accepted this quest from the king and we're going to follow through with it, even though that may put us on a path that has fewer branches or at some point no branches. But I think if the players have entered into it as part of their own choice, it's not going to feel like a complete railroad. I think the chief thing is the ending is not written. The PCs are not all guaranteed to get there. They're not guaranteed to succeed when they do. But I think there have to be pieces of a story within the campaign that are at least somewhat planned and not simply completely randomly generated. Because otherwise, a lot of what happens is just not going to make any sense. I don't think the story can just be what you talk about when you're eating pizza after the session. So that's my 2 cents. I want to thank Jason and Anthony and Evil Jeff and Joe for calling in. And if you have some thoughts on the subject, I hope you'll send me a message as well. Thank you. And now, more from my solo AD&D RPG campaign, Tales of the Dragon Slayers. In this episode's tale from the world of the Dragon Slayers, we're going back to that tribe of hill giants that we have seen several times before. First, when they essentially extorted food from the party at the Dragon Cave, and then later when they became allies with the orcs after doing the same thing with the orcs that took over the Dragon Cave after the party left it. And then who later encountered the werewolves that ambushed the group that Cudgel was with and ended up with his magical staff. And now that staff is buried in the ground not too far from the hill giant's lair. In this particular episode, the hill giant clan, mostly males but with one female and one older adolescent hill giant, were just embarking upon their daily quest for food when the adolescent spotted in the distance some flying creatures. And having heard tales from the orcs recently about their own battle with some flying creatures, the adolescent sees it as an opportunity to prove his strength and grabs a nearby large rock and throws it and hits one of the creatures, which turns out to be a small group of three manticores. The manticores react aggressively on coming to the giants, who themselves begin throwing more rocks as the manticores respond with their cruel iron spikes, to use the language from the beginning of the Tale of the Manticore podcast, which, if you're not listening to, you absolutely should. The encounter is somewhat one-sided because although the manticores do get several hits, mainly in on the female and the adolescent, which is apropos since the adolescent started this fight, eventually the sheer numbers of the giants take a toll. Two of the manticores die in the same round, and as the third manticore turns to flee, it is also dispatched just before it gets out of range. The hill giants, also remembering what they were told by the orcs, immediately begin searching around for the nest, looking for treasure and such that the orcs had found in their own encounter with flying creatures. But finding nothing of value, they recover the bodies to be used as food. With there only being three of the manticores, though they are sizable, they tear the bodies into chunks to disperse them, and as they do so, they find embedded in the fur or the bodies of the manticores the treasure that the manticores possess. These being several arrows, a sword, a mace, and a scroll. There's immediately a sort of tussle among the hill giants, seeking to claim the treasures as their own. The strongest of the giants eventually claims the sword. Another goes after the arrows, knowing that he can't deal with the strength of the ones who are fighting for the other weapons. And one picks up the mace and sort of stops, looking down at the giant he had knocked aside, who was bleeding slightly, and he extends his hand to help him up, which is an unusual action for a hill giant, as mostly they just fight for dominance and are not worried about the welfare of their fellow giants overall. The other giant doesn't know exactly what to make of this, but does accept the hand up and walks away, rubbing his head, looking confused. Over the coming days, this giant begins acting even more strangely, helping out the female with duties that normally are just hers around the camp, spending time with the adolescent, teaching him a few things, even rescuing the scroll when one of the giants was going to use it in a destructive manner, explaining that that could be used for trade. What's more, this giant knows that he is acting strangely, that this is not how he normally acts, and he is also confused by this. And eventually he offers to take the scroll to find a place to trade it for food or gold or something that the giants would care for. And the giants, having become rather suspicious of him, are happy to see him leave. Once he is out of sight of them, he circles around the camp to where the staff is buried, and he digs it up picks it up out of the ground and puts it in his sack, suffering no damage whatsoever, and walks off. The opening theme of this podcast was Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both from Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. If you have any thoughts or feedback, you can get in touch with me by leaving me a voicemail on my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. That's 864-209-1441. Or through SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/Phantom Thoughts. That's www.speakpipe.com/Phantom Thoughts. Or you can send me a message or an audio file on Discord, where I can be found the Pink Phantom, or through email, phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. That's phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. I don't have to play or read your feedback on the podcast if that is not your preference. Just let me know.